Breaking news, Wagner fighters now returning to Ukraine after a coup attempt ends in extraordinary circumstances. 12 Russian pilots dead and charges against the group's leader dropped. Volodymyr Zelensky says the rebellion shows chaos in Russia, while here at home the foreign minister says Australia is closely monitoring the situation overseas. Also making news, fresh reports that Nationals leader David Littleproud could face a leadership spill in the coming days amid bruised egos. And in sport, West Coast demolished by Sydney in the AFL with a 171-point loss as the club looks to a possible return to alignment in the reserves. Good evening. We begin with the latest breaking news out of Russia following those extraordinary scenes overnight. Wagner forces turning around just 200 kilometers outside of Moscow, where it appeared a coup attempt was in full swing. The mercenary group's leader has had charges against him dropped and is now heading to Belarus, while fighters return to Ukraine. 12 Russian pilots are also believed to be dead, with multiple military helicopters and at least one transport plane downed. National Affairs editor Austin Pollock begins our special coverage.
Well, this apparent coup finishing as fast as it started, a rebellion retreating. Just 24 hours since the Wagner Group chief announced they would go all the way and these troops were ready to die, the announcement came that they would begin retreating from their movements towards Moscow and out of Rostov. Fighters from the mercenary group have left the Russian military headquarters in the city of Rostov-on-Don, and they are now returning to military camps. The decision came after a deal brokered by the Belarusian president to call off the rebellion. Part of the deal means that Yevgeny Prigozhin will move to Belarus and all criminal cases against the Wagner boss will be dropped by the Kremlin, with Prigozhin ordering convoys to return to their bases to, quote, avoid bloodshed.
They wanted to disband the Wagner military company. We embarked on a march of justice. In 24 hours, we got to within 200 kilometers of Moscow. In this time, we did not spill a single drop of our fighters' blood. Now the moment has come when blood could be spilled. Understanding responsibility for the chance that Russian blood will be spilled on one side, we are turning our columns around and going back to field camps as planned.
Now the forces had advanced, making it all the way to the Moscow region. In doing that, Wagner forces reportedly killed 12 Russian pilots who were on board helicopters and an aircraft that had been shot down. Now Prigozhin first became allies with Putin and was known as Putin's chef, but the Wagner leader has also had a somewhat checkered past. He was sentenced to jail for 20 years for fraud offences and robbery, before starting his own restaurant, which he caught the eye of the Kremlin officials, leading to Prigozhin being associated with such leaders. Leaders and national security organisations right around the world are continuing to monitor the situation as tensions begin to de-escalate. Joe Biden reportedly has been briefed on the situation multiple times and has spoken with leaders from France, Germany and the UK. But now we wait as the fire slowly dies down and as the smoke clears, we will see the full effects of what has occurred over the last 24 to 48 hours.
Here at home, Foreign Minister Penny Wong says Australia is closely monitoring the situation in Russia. Ms Wong says the security situation is evolving and we are working closely with partners. We continue to condemn Russia's immoral and illegal invasion of Ukraine. Australians in Russia are advised to leave immediately if it is safe to do so, and the official travel advice remains: do not travel. Let's bring in 6 News GovCheck editor and the host of Between Parks Place and Capitol Hill, Stuart Jeffrey, for more analysis on what's occurred since last night. Stuart, Lukashenko is apparently the man who's negotiated all of this. Were we actually expecting him to have any role at all?
No, in fact, we were saying last night that Lukashenko depends on Putin, because if Putin's gone, then Lukashenko is also gone. But it appears that he almost has the ability to act as a somewhat impartial third party here for negotiations. Of course, with Lukashenko, although he's definitely got Putin's backing, he's not as tied to Putin as, say, as Putin's inner circle is. So it does give a somewhat semi-impartial third party who could help mediate any negotiations which are carried out. Of course, we first received notice from the Belarusian presidency that there was going to be negotiations that came out around last night, and it looks like that going forward it will be Lukashenko who is doing those.
What is next for the Wagner leader, though? He's off to Belarus with those charges dropped, but I mean, given he's been labelled a traitor, it's a bit hard to believe he's not about to face some kind of consequence.
Yeah, I wouldn't take Putin's word for it. Having said that, though, and I made this clear during our coverage last night, which you can find on replay on 6 News YouTube channel, that he'd never directly insulted Putin. It was always the defense minister or it was the Russian military. Of course, he never... The only thing he said about Putin was that Putin was deeply mistaken, was the exact quote from him. He never openly criticized Putin's actions personally. So having that distinction there could help him, but I think it's unlikely that there will be no repercussions here for anyone involved.
This is the closest someone has come to ousting Putin after all these years in power. Could this lead to even more of a hardline crackdown on dissent than we may have seen previously?
Yeah, the fact that he's now got dissent from the military, or at least from a private military company, the Wagner Group, and also from within the country. Alexei Navalny, for example, is in prison. He's the opposition party leader in the elections that are held in Russia. So there's kind of opposition here from more than just the one front now. So it does mean that Putin is facing a bit of a crisis per se with regards to his leadership in the country. And I would expect there to definitely be a crackdown on dissent following this. That would likely include repercussions against Prigozhin. So whether or not there are repercussions against Prigozhin that are actually, rolled out. Of course, Putin's saying there won't be anything, but if there isn't anything, then it might actually suggest that we're not going to see too much of a crackdown here. Although, again, I would doubt that Putin's going to let him get off this so easily, because he did it again. Although Prigozhin never openly criticized Putin except to say he was mistaken, Putin did label the operations a terrorist move and mobilizing the National Guard and the riot police in Moscow under the guise of counterterrorism. So there's definitely that aspect there that we will be considering in the next coming days as the Wagner Group kind of moves back into Ukraine and returns to the front line.
Look, we will keep monitoring all of that. Just quickly changing pace on the subject of crackdown, though, the New South Wales Premier, he is trying to look for a meeting with Meta to try and restrict activists from streaming their demonstrations online. What would this all mean with legalities when we know it is already pretty hard to stop a protest being shared on social media?
Exactly. It would take a lot of censorship from social media platforms. Of course, Australia doesn't have any free speech per se, because the closest thing that we have is the implied freedom of political communication, which isn't so much a freedom of speech as it is an equality to participate in Australian democracy. Of course, that could definitely raise some challenges here to a blanket ban on broadcasting any and all protests. Personally, I don't expect this to a blanket ban to succeed. We did see in Tasmania back in 2017, of course, that the protests there, the anti-logging protests there were discouraged. All protests were discouraged by legislation in place. And the High Court, of course, said, well, it's going way too far. It's because it's discouraging all protests. It's unlawful. And we could very well see the same thing here, but a more targeted approach. Minns did, of course, say that his main focus was on those anti-coal protesters rather than, say, Invasion Day protesters or anti-lockdown protesters. So he has singled out that group. A more targeted approach with his legislation would definitely be more likely to succeed. But given how he's currently seeking to work with Facebook to ban all broadcast live streams of protests, definitely I don't expect that to be upheld by the courts, even if it goes through, although the Liberal Party has backed it, so it would have the numbers to get through both houses of the New South Wales Assembly.
All right, Stuart Jeffrey, thank you.
Thank you.
There are fresh reports that Nationals leader David Littleproud could face a leadership spill in the coming days. The Sunday Telegraph claims bruised egos and treatment of staff, as well as Littleproud's relationship with Liberal leader Peter Dutton, are behind the possibility of a spill. Keith Pitt and former leader Barnaby Joyce are believed to be possible contenders if Littleproud is indeed spilled. He has brushed off the rumours, again claiming they are relating to bruised egos. Littleproud got the top job after the coalition's election loss last May. The Prime Minister has acknowledged that Labor winning the upcoming Fadden by-election is a long shot. Speaking to Sky News, Anthony Albanese said Letitia Del Fabro was starting at very long odds in the Gold Coast-based seat, which is held by the Liberal Nationals on a two-party preferred margin of more than 10%. The by-election was triggered by the resignation of former Government Minister Stuart Robert. 13 candidates are running. There they are on screen now. Labor and the Greens are high up on the ballot, with One Nation, the Democrats, Legalise Cannabis, and 3 independents among the 13 candidates running. Voters will head to the polls on July 15. 6 News will have special coverage for you as it happens. Housing Minister Julie Collins says rent caps don't help long-term amid the ongoing housing crisis. Collins says renters' rights will be on the agenda at an upcoming National Cabinet meeting, but the decision from the Greens to block Labor's signature housing bill will make the situation worse.
What the overwhelming experts say, though, is that this doesn't work. We obviously want to look at things that do work, and the primary thing we're being told is add to supply, and that's what we're trying to do.
The Greens have continued to push for a rent freeze. Joe Biden says he will never back down from protecting a woman's rights to choose on the one-year anniversary of Roe v. Wade being overturned. The decision from the US Supreme Court last year removed the constitutional right to abortion, which gave power to individual states. Since then, a number of restrictions have come into effect in multiple states. Biden says that the only way to stop those who are committed to taking away women's rights and freedoms in every state is to elect a Congress that will pass a law restoring Roe v. Wade. Back home and changing pace, and the grassland earless dragon, which was thought to be extinct in the wild, has been rediscovered. Zoos Victoria has been actively searching for the reptile, which is listed as critically endangered since 2017. The Victorian and federal governments will now invest $188,000 for a new project trialling the use of specifically trained detection dogs to sniff out more populations of the dragon. The reptile's numbers had declined due to predators like foxes and habitat loss. It had last appeared in the wild more than 50 years ago in Victoria in 1969. To sport now, and West Coast coach Adam Simpson remains under pressure after his side was demolished by Sydney in the AFL with a 171-point loss. The club is also looking towards a possible return to alignment in the WAFL, with their reserve side yet to win a single game. Senior reporter Darby Travers has more.
It's been described as a bloodbath, a massacre, a demolition and utter humiliation. West Coast handed a club record loss of 171 points at the SCG. It is their fourth loss of more than 100 points this season and their second in a row. They now sit firmly at the bottom of the ladder with a percentage of just 47.3. The Eagles have faced many injury and selection concerns right throughout the season, with coach Adam Simpson admitting after the game that the club is in a pit right now. In the WAFL, it's even worse, 0 wins and a percentage just over 32.3. Only 2 AFL-listed players are currently playing in the reserve side. Reports now do indicate the Eagles are open to aligning with a WAFL club again. They were previously with East Perth from 2014 until 2018. The reserve side copped a 91-point loss yesterday. Previously this year, they've also lost by 108, 111, 129 and even 169 points. Earlier this year, they were believed to be in informal talks about forfeiting a game as they struggled to find players, with former Eagle Will Schofield even being called back to play. The Eagles will face St Kilda next week.
Darby Travers there, and now Ivan Amelli with a look what's making news right now on WAMN News.
Thanks, Leo. Tonight on WAMN News, what are the chances Labor to face another contender in the Rockingham by-election as the Western Australia Party exclusively reveal their new candidate?
High expectations. Prominent community leaders lay out their vision for new Premier Cook.
He's alive, an elderly man found several days after he went missing in the bush.
An alternative to The Voice, part 2 of the No Campaign's interview on Western Perspective. And later, Dr. Andrew Miller's comment. Join us tonight on the WMN News Facebook page and YouTube channel.
Alright, a reminder of the top stories we are following on 6NewsAU, and Wagner forces have turned around just 200 kilometres outside of Moscow, where it appeared a coup attempt was in full swing. The mercenary group's leader has had charges dropped against him and is now heading to Belarus while fighters return to Ukraine. And also making news, there are fresh reports Nationals leader David Littleproud could face a leadership spill in the coming days. The Sunday Telegraph claims bruised egos and treatment of staff, as well as Littleproud's relationship with Liberal leader Peter Dutton, are behind the possibility of a spill. And that is 6 News for this hour. There is more news 24/7 on our website, 6NewsAU.com, and on social media. Just search 6NewsAU to find us. More news coverage continues right after this. For now though, I'm Leonardo Puglisi. Thanks for your company. Good night.